I think we're going to start. I think that, obviously COVID seems to be better. I don't want to say it's gone, but it's better.
For sure.
But I think we're going to start bringing guests in as soon as possible. And what I mean by that is maybe if we're lucky, as soon as next week. And then from there on, what I was thinking, because I know a lot of you guys, like the quote unquote solo snake talk. I think we'll keep it maybe like one day a month where we don't have guests. And then I'm going to try to bring in guests the other three weeks.
Right.
And most of them be reptile guests. Occasionally we'll do the Brother Clint type of thing.
Yeah.
Or the Ari thing where we're doing something completely outside the box. But I'm going to work on, I think the challenge is like to work on guests that aren't on every other podcast.
Right.
Because
you don't want to hear the same story regurgitated.
Right. Because if you really look at the reptile podcast, and I've always said, like, listen, it's not that I don't want to be a reptile podcast, but I'm a reptile guy, and my life evolves around reptiles.
Right.
But at the same time, I want to be more than just another reptile podcast, because quite honestly, there's just a lot of reptile podcasts, and a lot of them do a great job. MJ crushes it. He's got whatever. I think he's got 2 or 3 different podcasts. I don't even.
I don't know. I can't keep up.
I can't even keep up with MJ.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, Billy's got a podcast. There's just I don't want to name everyone, because obviously I'll leave someone out and then they'll be mad at me.
Why would you mention me?
Yeah, why didn't you mention me in your podcast?
Yeah.
But my point is, there's a lot of really good reptile podcasts that cover reptile podcasts, really snaky type of stuff. Obviously Jeremy is another one.
Right.
Reptile Talk with those guys. But I don't want to be that. I really don't, for 2 reasons. Number one, I don't want to step on anyone else's toes. Let them do that world. And number 2, I have so many interests beyond reptiles. I want to always talk about reptiles. And the one thing that probably the Snake Talk / Saturday Night Solo does is and this is something that and I'm going to talk here later a little bit about, the vlog. And today we put a video out about the future of the vlog, and something that's really been wearing on not just myself, but Jay
of course.
and everyone in my team. So we'll talk about that a little bit later too. But my point is that obviously, I like the Snake Talk in the sense that, I have 30 something years of experience. So I've seen a lot. I've been through a lot. I've been through like the dark ages of reptiles, when it was like, you were a closet reptile person. And if you were, to the first reptile expos, to the biggest reptile expos, I've traveled the world to different expos. So I like bringing all that knowledge of breeding, keeping, husbandry, you name it. I love bringing that to you guys. But as far as like a reptile podcast, really beyond that, I'd like to bring guests on that maybe people don't know as much about because they haven't made the podcast series. I mean, if you think about it, like obviously we do podcasts, and Billy does podcasts, and Ozzy's been doing podcasts, and Justin Cabelic has been doing podcasts. Miguel will eventually, do some podcasts here and there. And the list goes on and on, you know what I mean? But it's kind of like the same 25 or 30 people kind of recirculate, like
in rotation.
So as soon as, Ozzy does this podcast, then he does that podcast and that podcast and that, and now he's been on 10 podcasts. And I love, by the way, I'm not singling out Ozzy. We're just having
just an example.
I love Ozzy's, he's got a great story. I've known Ozzy since he started. And as a matter of fact, the history behind that is really a great entrepreneurial story, because he bought the Orange Dream, the original Orange Dream, from a guy named Ian Nizdowski from Outback Reptile, and I don't know what he paid for it, but Ian told me he paid like $100 for it.
Jeez.
Like literally. Now again, he may have paid more, but I know Ian used to bring in a ton more than anyone else, imported baby farmed animals. And he was really cheap. I mean, Ozzy doesn't live far from Ian. And as a matter of fact, I went to Ian's wedding and hung out with Ozzy the whole night at his wedding.
Oh, that's so cool.
So they're friends. They're close together. And I think that Ozzy used to just go over there when he was getting into the ball python game and pick through all the imports. And I think that, again, I don't know what he paid. Ian told me he paid $100. But my point is that I think that if Ozzy picked out something like this is kind of cool, I could see Ian going, give me $100.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? I could see that happening. And we all know that Orange Dreams as a whole gene is one of my favorite genes. I think it does amazing things to so many things.
Beautiful.
But a normal Orange Dream isn't that extreme. You could see if you were looking through a bag of 100 captive
might not even notice.
You literally might not notice that there's this interesting animal. Or, that looks a little bit different. Yeah, it's worth $100 or something like that.
Right.
But anyways, and by the way, feel free, guys, to ask questions in the super chats. You can hit me up. We'll be answering super chats all night. But so Ozzy really took the opportunity with this Orange Dream project and really spearheaded it. I mean, this goes back, I don't know, 15, 18 years, something like that. And he's turned it into a multi-million-dollar business, and not just with ball pythons, but also investing in real estate and other investments. And he's really made an empire, and to the point where, he like quit his day job and now he's doing this and not just doing it full time, but multi-millionaire full time,
right.
And so, and I'm going on a little tangent about Ozzy because I love the guy and I think the world of him, but he's also been on every podcast. That's not to say I wouldn't want to sit across the table from him and have him on this podcast and maybe ask him questions and maybe even reminisce about days before the people that have had him on every podcast know about. You know what I mean?
Right.
Talk about those early Ian days, the early days of Pete Call, because he's in that area, Paul Miles, all these other things like that. I think we could have a really interesting podcast. That being said, I don't want him to come on and say the same thing that he said in every other podcast he's been on, right? So my point of this kind of, topic is the fact that I'd like to find some people that you guys don't know about, or maybe you do know about, but are very quiet.
Right.
Like interestingly enough, like I've talked with Tom Crutchfield, and listen, some people hate him, some people love him. I'm not here to tell you what your opinion of Tom Crutchfield should be. I personally have been friends with Tom for a long time. He's got a very jaded past. He admits that jaded past.
Yeah,
I am a person that is a perfect example of like, don't judge me for what I did 12 years ago. Judge me for what I'm doing right now. And Tom did a lot of bad things. And listen, he'll boast about the fact that he smuggled the first bearded dragon into the country, and if it wasn't for him, there wouldn't be bearded dragons. Now, that's kind of a sad statement, like, oh my God, there's a whole bunch of bearded dragons in the country because this guy smuggled them in, and he admits to it. But at the same time, he admits it, and he's like, hey, that was 30 years ago.
Right.
I don't smuggle stuff into the country now. You know what I mean? And I'm not, so at some point, you have to be absolved for things in the past, especially when you own it and you say, hey, just like me, the things I did 10 years ago, there's a lot of things I regret tremendously. I own them, I've grown from them, and I've moved on. You know what I mean? So my point is that, but Tom is not a very tech savvy guy, so he hasn't been on all these podcasts, right?
Right.
Now, Tom is willing to fly up and do my podcast. I think it'd be a really interesting podcast.
Oh, I think
sit down for 2 hours and chat with Tom about everything about life. I mean, from the early days of reptiles to, obviously the partner standoff where his partner, he shot and killed his partner, I mean, there's
to being in the beginning of Tiger King.
Yeah, to being in the beginning of the Tiger King, so I'm not just saying Tom, I'm saying there's a lot of players like Tom that are interesting, and not all of them are old timers, now some are old timers that you guys may not even know who Gary Sipperly is. You may not know who Gary Kiesler is. You may not know who John Ruiz is. You may not know who Ernie Wagner is, and the list goes on and on. Now, not all those guys are going to be able to come out. Bob Applegate, but some of them will. And then there's some younger guys that are very interesting in the hobby that maybe haven't made the circuit around either. That I think would be interesting, as well as pulling in some like zookeepers. I'd like to hear, what does a zookeeper think about the reptile trade? And
right.
Maybe a reptile curator or something on that line. So my point is that I definitely want to start bringing guests in. And I definitely think that 3 out of 4 weekends we will bring guests in. I think it's that's the plans for the podcast going forward.
Damn, son.
Can we rail this in?